We begin with major news out of Washington. After the House Judiciary's first impeachment hearing, Speaker Nancy Pelosi announcing the president's abuse of power has left her no choice but to officially draft articles of impeachment in a particularly tense moment during Pelosi's weekly press conference. So check it out.
Do you hate the president, Madam Speaker? Because
I don't hate anybody.
Representative Collins,
We don't hate anybody, not anybody in the world. So don't accuse me.
I did not accuse you.
You did.
I asked the question.
I think the president is a coward when it comes to helping our kids who are afraid of gun violence. I think he is cruel when he doesn't deal with helping our dreamers, of which we're very proud. I think he's in denial about the climate crisis. However, that's about the election. This is about the election. Take it up in the election. This is about the Constitution of the United States and the facts that lead to the president's violation of his oath of office. And as a Catholic, I resent your using the word hate in a sentence that addresses me. I don't hate anyone. I was raised in a way that is a heart full of love, and always prayed for the president. And I still pray for the president. I pray for the president all the time. So don't mess with me when it comes to words like that.
All right, she clearly was not messing around. So right now I'm joined by Ben Gittleson at the White House. We have Catherine Faulders on Capitol Hill, and our own constitutional scholar Kate Shaw joins me on set. And Catherine, I'll start with you. Nancy's words right there, pretty powerful, but there's also some new hearings starting next week on Monday.
Yeah, that's right. Just moments ago, the House Judiciary Committee announced that both the Judiciary Committee and the Intelligence Committee will be giving presentations. Their lawyers will be presenting on the facts of this inquiry, what they've found. And it's interesting because that they include judiciary in here, too. You remember their investigation into obstruction of justice of the Mueller probe, for example. So we're likely to hear a lot about that on Monday, as we did in that hearing yesterday. But that is happening at 9 a.m. They just noticed that, and there might be more hearings as well.
Yeah, and so as we mentioned, the Judiciary Committee holding their first hearing yesterday, 3 scholars called by the Democrats and 1 constitutional scholar called by the Republicans. And perhaps unsurprisingly, there wasn't a consensus. So take a look at the highlights.
He was willing to compromise our security and his office for personal political gain.
This is not an impeachment. This is just a simple railroad job. And today's is a waste of time. It didn't start with Mueller. It didn't start with a phone call. You know where this started? It started with tears in Brooklyn in November 2016.
On the basis of the testimony and the evidence before the House, President Trump has committed impeachable high crimes and misdemeanors by corruptly abusing the office of the presidency.
As I explain in the remainder and balance of my opening statement, the record compiled thus far shows the president has committed several impeachable offenses.
If you impeach a president, if you make a high crime and misdemeanor out of going to the courts, it is an abuse of power. It's your abuse of power. You're doing precisely what you're criticizing the president for doing.
All right, so I want to bring in Kate Shaw, as I said, our own constitutional scholar. And I just want to get your takeaways, because as we saw there, you have 3 people saying one thing, and then you have John Turley, who said something totally different.
Yeah, so the 3 Democratic witnesses were remarkably uniform in their presentations. And they said very clearly, they've looked at the facts that the House Intelligence Committee amassed, and they have concluded that based on the Constitution's language, the intent of the framers of the Constitution, and constitutional practice over 200 plus years, this conduct clearly amounts to high crimes and misdemeanors under the Constitution. And, I don't think they even just said that this conduct would justify impeachment. I think they said it required it, that it would be dangerous for Congress not to move forward impeaching a president on these facts. As you said, the GOP witness, Jonathan Turley, took a very different position. He didn't sort of agree with Ranking Member Collins, who said, this is a waste of time. In fact, he said, I'm not defending the president's conduct, and I do think that under some circumstances, seeking election interference from a foreign government might be impeachable. I just don't think the facts are just not strong enough yet on this record for the Democrats to move forward with impeachment.
Yeah, and what's your feelings on that? This idea that the Democrats are moving too fast, but it's the White House who is keeping some of these key witnesses from testifying in the first place.
Yeah, I think the Democrats Democrats are in a tricky position. It is doubtless true that they would like testimony from people like Secretary Pompeo, Mick Mulvaney, people who were sort of as close as could be to the events at the heart of this inquiry. They haven't been able to speak to at all. And so I think it's right that there are places where their impeachment case could be stronger. But of course, as you say, it is the White House's stonewalling that has prevented access to these key witnesses. And so the White House is in a tricky spot. It can either try to pursue litigation that could take many months to run its course, or it can move forward based on the record that it has assembled. And it seems to have decided on the latter course, move forward, not wait for courts to rule. There might be some middle ground, which is that they move forward. An impeachment trial starts in the Senate, sometime in January. And if they are pressing forward, there are a couple of these cases ongoing. If they press forward quickly enough, there might be some universe in which there's a ruling, maybe even from the Supreme Court, in time to get a witness or two in front of the Senate who wasn't available before the House. I don't think it's likely, but I do think there's a possibility.
Yeah, the timing is everything. And Ben, I want to go to you because I want you to tell us what the White House strategy is here. The president tweeting this morning that he wants it to move fast. He wants to get to that Senate trial.
Yeah, that's right, Kimberly. That's because he has largely dismissed the impeachment inquiry in the House, which is controlled by Democrats. He thinks he'll get a fairer trial in the Senate, which is controlled by Republicans. While the White House doesn't think the House should actually send articles of impeachment to the Senate, if it does, the White House thinks that Trump will get acquitted. So this morning he tweeted, "If you're going to impeach me, do it now, fast, so we can have a fair trial in the Senate and so that our country can get back to business." He also tweeted after Pelosi's announcement this morning that impeachment is rarely used, and impeaching him would set a bad precedent for future presidents. Now, one other detail we do know about the White House strategy is that they plan to call live witnesses to the Senate if it does, in fact, move to the Senate. That would be different from 1999 when Bill Clinton was impeached and he had a trial in the Senate when they relied on tape depositions. The White House has not been clear or offered specifics on who those witnesses might be, though.
Yeah, and Catherine, I just want to get ideas of what this timeline actually looks like. Is this something that we can expect to be wrapped up before the new year, before we get into the 2020 election cycle? What do you think?
Yeah, well, at least the House side of it. You can see that Chairman Nadler is moving very fast here. This tees up a vote on the House floor on these articles of impeachment in the next couple of weeks. So we are likely to have a vote on this, by December 20th, before December 20th, hopefully before Christmas, and then it will quickly then move into a Senate trial. But bottom line is here that this is moving at a very fast pace, Kimberly.
And Kate, I just want to come back to you for a second because what's at stake here if, in fact, you go through the Senate trial, but there's no removal?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that the president's tweets today are actually quite revealing. So I don't think the president wants to be impeached. I don't think any president wants to be impeached. And that is irrespective of what happens in the Senate. So it takes a lot of time and energy from a White House to defend against an impeachment. And, history remembers when presidents are impeached, whether or not, of course, they're ultimately removed. We've never actually removed a president, and yet we know Bill Clinton was impeached. That is forever associated with his legacy in office. And I think President Trump appreciates that. So on some level, it may be that what the Democrats are hoping to do here is to send some kind of a symbolic message to the country, to the president, to the world, that this conduct is, in their view, unacceptable, and that maybe you can have the sort of deterrent effect of, disincentivizing this kind of conduct in the future, incentivizing election meddling, inviting foreign governments into our elections. If you move forward with impeachment, even if removal isn't a very likely outcome. So I think that may be what's driving the Democrats, that it is worth doing, maybe for political, but maybe for more kind of sort of broad national interest purposes, even if it's almost a certain conclusion, absent something sort of very unexpected changing, which, things can change as impeachment processes play out, but that they think there is some independent value, even if removal is extremely unlikely.
All right, Kate Shaw, our constitutional scholar. We had Ben Gittleson at the White House and Catherine Faulders on Capitol Hill. Thank you guys so much. We appreciate it. And of course, while all of this was going down, the Trump administration approved a controversial move, one that could take away food stamps from nearly 700,000 people. So I want to bring in Jim Weil. He's the president of Food Research and the Action Center. And Jim, it's good to see you. But before you give me your opinion on all of this, I just want you to remind people of how this actually works and the impact it's going to have.
Sure. So there's a bad rule in the food stamp program, the SNAP program, that adults without children between the ages of 18 and 60 have to work or only get food stamps for 3 months. even if they're in high unemployment areas. And previously, in high unemployment areas, governors could apply for a waiver from the Department of Agriculture to waive that rule. So people struggling to find jobs but who couldn't find them could continue to get food stamps beyond that 3-month window. Congress last year made a decision not to change that rule on a bipartisan basis. Congress left it alone. Now the administration is limiting the ability of governors to get waivers of that rule for people in high unemployment areas.
Yeah, so obviously this has received a lot of backlash, including from you. You called it deeply flawed and ill-conceived, so I want you to explain that.
Sure. Well, the food stamp program, the SNAP program, is the nation's first defense against hunger. And it's most important for people who are struggling with unemployment or limited hours of work or in training programs. And what this does is it takes it away from the neediest people in America, in the neediest areas of America, in the poorest areas. And it takes power away from governors to get SNAP to their constituents, their people in their states who are struggling in areas with high unemployment. It's going to harm not just those in the program who will be thrown out of the program, as you said, almost 700,000 people a year, but it's also going to harm retailers, the farmers, everybody in the food economy.
Yeah, so are there any moves right now to repeal this? Because it's going through. Is there any action where people can try to reverse it?
Well, it takes effect on April 1st. So there will be actions in Congress and presumably in the courts to try and stop this rule, and we'll see what happens. There's a lot of anger about this in Congress. And as I indicated before, Congress decided last year on a bipartisan basis in the Farm Bill to leave the rule alone. And that explicit decision has been overridden by the administration in this gratuitous Christmas season Grinch-like act.
All right. So we'll have to see how this all plays out. As you said, it doesn't go into effect until April of 2020. Jim Weil, president of Food Research and Action Center, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate that. And guys, we're going to move overseas to some major protests in Paris, huge demonstrations against French President Emmanuel Macron's decision to overhaul the country's pension system. And our Maggie Rulli is right there on the ground. Maggie, if you can just set the scene and tell us what the energy is like right now.
Well, Kimberly, you may have just overheard some of the flash grenades that have been going off. We've been hearing those pretty consistently for the past half hour or so. These protests have been going on since the afternoon, but now at nighttime, they're really starting to heat up. You can see just the line of police surrounding the square behind me. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of protesters in that square. It's a common place where they like to come. And we've seen them running around as the police are continuing to try to show a force here. We know there's about 6,000 in out, and they their job cut out for them because we've already seen reports of fires that have been started. And remember, what's really incredible, Kimberly, is not just here in Paris. It's the entire country that's dealing with this. About 250 cities in the entire France. Just heard another flash grenade right now go off. They're really trying to control this crowd. And it's the numbers in particular that are so shocking. And the goal of just almost entirely shutting down the country, because we're dealing not just with these protests, but also with mass strikes and demonstrations. So transit, trains, flights, metro, bus, all canceled, all delayed. We're also dealing with schools that are closed across the country. Teachers are on strike. We're dealing with hospital shortages, nurses and doctors that are on strike. So again, Kimberly, pretty much the entire country has the potential to go on shutdown.
Yeah, and Maggie, just for clarity, what are the people specifically demanding?
You mentioned that pension reform. That's really at the heart of these protests. Protesters here say, France has one of the most generous pension reforms, and they want to keep it that way. Right now, the president here and his team have suggested overhaul of the pension system. They want to make it a universal pension system. They want to increase the age for full retirement benefits. But the people here, the people that are out in the streets, they're saying that's unfair, that's unjust, that means they're going to have to work more and get paid less, that millions of people are going to lose their benefits. That's why they're out here in the streets streets right now. And Kimberly, what's incredible is that we're seeing people from pretty much all 42 unions here in France, unions like rail workers, but also unions like opera singers. So this is a diverse crowd, and it's going to be really interesting to see how these protests continue to play out.
All right. Well, we hope everyone stays safe. And of course, this is coming during the holiday season. So interesting timing. Maggie, really right there on the ground in Paris. Thank you so much. And guys, we move to a tragic story out of Hawaii. Another shooting, this time by a U.S. sailor at the Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard in Honolulu. The sailor fatally shooting 2 people and injuring another before killing himself. Our Kaylee Hartung is on the ground with the latest. Kaylee?
Kimberly, there is shock and sadness this morning at Pearl Harbor. The base here, these gates behind me, now reopen after going on lockdown yesterday following the deadly shooting. A U.S. Navy active duty sailor opened fire in a maintenance area for submarines here at the historic base on Wednesday afternoon. It was around 2:30 in broad daylight. He struck 3 civilian contractors, these men all employees of the Department of Defense, before turning the gun on himself. 2 of those men were killed. One, a 36-year-old, is recovering in a local hospital today. Witnesses say the sailor was in uniform during this rampage. Authorities have not identified him by name, and they have not identified the victims, but they do say that this man was a U.S. Navy active duty sailor who was assigned to the USS Columbia, a submarine that is currently undergoing maintenance here at Pearl Harbor. It's unclear if this sailor knew his victims, and there's no understanding at this time of his motive, but a full investigation is underway by the Navy and the base here at Pearl Harbor. Kimberly?
Very tragic. We appreciate that, Kaylee. And imagine if the deep, painful grief of the death of your son is not enough. Imagine the killer filing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against your family. This is, in fact, the situation for Trayvon Martin's family. George Zimmerman, acquitted of the murder of Trayvon in 2012, is now seeking $100 million for defamation. Our Steve Osunsami is in Atlanta with more. Steve?
Kimberly, we should first underline that these are wild claims that prosecutors say shouldn't even be taken seriously at this point. But nonetheless, George Zimmerman is taking this case to court. He is suing Trayvon Martin's family, their lawyer, state police, and former prosecutors, alleging that they somehow faked a witness. The witness that they're focusing on is the young woman who said that she was on the phone with Trayvon Martin as he was being gunned down by George Zimmerman. In this lawsuit where they are asking for $100 million, George Zimmerman and his team claimed that this victim was faked, that the person who testified at trial was actually the half-sister of the real person who was on the phone who didn't want to testify at trial. And Trayvon Martin's family say they feel victimized yet again, and that this is another example of trying to defend the indefensible, and that Zimmerman is really just trying to make a buck. And there may be some truth to that. This is coming out at the same time that he's pushing a new movie making these same allegations. And we should also point out that the lawyer who is behind this is a known conspiracy theorist who once tried to file a petition to deport President Obama and once sued President Obama and Eric Holder because he felt that they threatened his existence as a white man in America. Despite all of this, this lawsuit will continue, even though many people feel it is without merit. Kimberly?
All right, Steve, we're going to move on. The winter weather is still raging across the country, so we're going to get a check on the national forecast, and I want to bring in our chief meteorologist, Rob Marciano. Rob?
Hey, Kimberly, great to be with you on this Thursday. Pretty potent storm moved into California yesterday, and we got another one that's coming in behind it, but just about an inch of rain falling. And a lot of that coming really in just about 15 minutes, especially in Burbank, parts of East LA, where the 710 freeway had some issues with a tractor trailer nearly tumbling over an overpass. That's pretty intense stuff there. That rain moving out, at least for now. Also, the 101 just south of San Jose saw some closures because of flooding there. Next storm up is been intensifying. It's growing in size. It's a larger one, more expansive. It's going to affect everyone from Seattle down to San Diego, but the core of it's going to come into Northern California tomorrow night. Could see some winds approaching damaging levels, but certainly a lot of rain and a lot of snow, 1 to 3 feet of snow expected with this as it pours into the Sierra above about 6,000 feet. So that'll affect some of the mountain passes there, and certainly the ski resorts will start to see some of that snow pile up. Speaking of snow, we had some lake effect behind the cold blast in the east. This is just south of Erie along I-79. With about 6 inches of snow falling there, but we'll have much more in the way of lake effect snow next week as a cold, bitter blast of air is scheduled to come in. Look at Wednesday morning's wind chills in Minneapolis. About 30 degrees below zero. Yeesh. Winter is coming, Kimberly. Nobody can stop it. Back to you.
Rob, winter is here. All right, guys, it's pretty normal these days for a lot of things to get misinterpreted. Take the latest ad from high-end exercise equipment company Peloton. For a 30-second commercial, it's generating a lot of outrage and conversation, so just watch it for yourself.
Okay, you ready?
Yes.
Now.
A Peloton? Give it up for our first time ride.
All right, first ride. I'm a little nervous, but excited. Let's do this. 5 days in a row. You surprised? I am. 6 a.m. Yay.
Rising with the sun.
That was totally worth it.
Let's go, Grace in Boston. 50 rides.
She just said my name. A year ago, I didn't realize how much this would change me. Thank you.
This holiday, give the gift of Peloton.
All right, so Will Reeve joins me on set right now to break this down. Will, I got to ask you, okay, when you first watched it, before all of this outrage, did anything stand out to you?
I guess I'm not sufficiently woke because I didn't know that I was supposed to be offended by this because it seems like a pretty straightforward ad. It's easy to follow. The woman, the wife and mother, gets this for what looks like Christmas, and she rides it, and she has this sort of transformational experience. But then digging deeper and logging online, you learn that people find this ad could be sexist or misogynist, that maybe the husband is lording over her, that making her ride this bike against her will and trying to make her lose weight even though she's already thin, and people were firing off all sorts of memes and tweets and a whole thing. And now it's got there's all this hullabaloo around it, which I guess is sort of part of what Peloton might want, getting talked about. But really, I didn't understand it, and I still don't really, if I'm being honest. I know I'm supposed to report the news, not opine on it, but that's where I stand.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like once you hear people were offended by it, when you watch it, you're sort of looking for something, because this is sort of my second time seeing it after all of the conversation.
Right, there's a point where she's selfie videoing herself and she looks a little bit nervous, but then maybe that's just because she's nervous because she got a Peloton and she's, doesn't know what to expect. And then people are sort of transposing their own narratives that exist outside the 30 seconds of the commercial. People who are anti this commercial are saying, oh, he's making her do this and he's a emotionally abusive, manipulative husband. And then people on the pro side of this saying, calm down, it's just an ad and there's no big deal, are saying maybe she asked for it, maybe she's training for a triathlon. Like, guys, we got to stick within those 30 seconds. We can't be creating this whole world around this Peloton ad that is really, it seems like everyone getting worked up over something that they should be putting their energy toward something else.
Yeah, I think we're living in an era where people are used to sort of getting worked up about things, but all of this controversy actually made the stocks drop for Peloton as well.
That is where this becomes more of a story, that the internet mob, such that it is, actually had an effect on the company's bottom line. Peloton IPO'd recently, going public, and they haven't been doing great. The company does lose money right now, but they've been trending upwards. But then on Tuesday, after the outrage came for this ad, they lost nearly 10% of their market value, almost $1 billion worth of their market value, which is nothing to laugh at, although I think people who watch the markets know that you should buy the dip. That is that's the unsolicited advice that I'll give you as an amateur, that when these things happen, when a company is in the news for something negative but not transformationally terrible for the company, it's going to dip for a little bit, but it's just temporary, not a trend.
So I think another question is, how did the company respond to all of this?
They did, in fact, engage with this whole controversy, which I think some crisis experts might advise against, but they did release a statement saying, while we're disappointed in how some have misinterpreted this commercial, we are encouraged by and grateful for the outpouring of support we've received from those who understand what we were trying to communicate. So basically, as with everything in 2019 and probably beyond, there are two sides to everything, and people are going to firmly stay on the side that they believe in, whether they are right or wrong.
And God bless the woman in the ad. I mean, she's very recognizable now as the Peloton wife.
Yeah, and she looks like she's in great shape and having a nice time, in my opinion. But apparently that opinion offends some people, and that's just the way things go in 2019.
All right, we'll read with the breakdown. We appreciate it. And guys, that's it for today. So continue to take care of yourselves. And if you're around, you can stick around for the briefing room at 3:30 p.m. Then you can check out World News Prime at 8 p.m. And if you want to stay updated on all of these headlines, you can go to abcnews.com or download the app. I'm Kimberly Brooks, and I'll see you tomorrow.